and more than a decade since the Ukrainians have known peace in their homeland. They've had homes destroyed, lands seized, children abducted, and loved ones killed by Putin's forces. And yet the Ukrainian people still fight with remarkable determination, military and civilian alike. And almost 3.5 years on, I'm proud to say that this House remains united for Ukraine. Yeah. And Britain remains united for Ukraine. In fact, polling shows that we retain the strongest public support for Ukraine of any European nation. Our solidarity is grounded in our deep respect for their courage and in recognition that the defence of Europe starts in Ukraine, because we know that if Putin prevails in Ukraine, he won't stop with Ukraine. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me begin by providing a battlefield update. Russia is maintaining pressure along the whole length of the front line, with a special focus on Sumy in the northeast and Pokrovsk in the southeast, as well as in Kursk. Last month, Russian ground forces likely seized approximately 550 square kilometres of Ukrainian territory. That's an area greater than the size of Greater Manchester. And yet they face continuing difficulties attempting to take fortified towns or cities, and they have not taken a significant town for months. Indeed, they've tried without success to seize Pokrovsk for nearly a year. What ground they do gain is coming at great cost. Last month, the number of Russian troops killed or wounded surpassed more than 1 million. This year alone, Russia has sustained 240,000 casualties. And despite these catastrophic Russian losses, Putin's ruthless ambitions do not appear to be waning. Russia is escalating the high numbers of one-way attack drones launched at Ukraine. 1,900 in April, 4,000 in May, 5,000 in June, and already this month in July, 3,200. On the 9th of July, a week ago today, the largest aerial strike of the war was recorded when Russia launched more than 700 attack drones in a single night. Despite the onslaught, the Ukrainians are taking the fight to Putin, striking military targets in Russia that his people see and know about. Spiderweb, Madam Deputy Speaker, was an operation of remarkable precision and extraordinary success, which dealt a fierce blow to Putin. 1 year of meticulous planning, resulting in the damage of 41 long-range bombers, planes which threaten not only Ukraine, but also NATO as well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must step up now our efforts on getting further military support to the front line. Last month, on the eve of the NATO summit, we welcomed President Zelensky to number 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister signed a UK-Ukraine agreement to share advanced battlefield capabilities and technologies. A deal which means our defence industry can rapidly develop the cutting-edge technologies from Ukraine and step up the production for Ukraine. And at the NATO summit that followed, 32 nations came together to sign a new defence and national security investment pledge to spend 5% of GDP by 2035. They came together, 32 nations, to reaffirm our commitment to Ukraine, with 40 billion euros pledged in security assistance for this year. It was a good summit for Ukraine, it was a good summit for Britain, it was a good summit for NATO, it was a bad summit for Putin. Those commitments at NATO have been the basis for President Trump to signal a significant shift this week on Ukraine, announcing that NATO weapons transfers and a 50-day deadline for Putin to agree to peace. So with the NATO Secretary General, President Trump agreed to large-scale purchases of US military equipment by NATO allies, including Patriot missiles, other air defence systems and munitions, which he committed to getting, and I quote, quickly distributed to the battlefield. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK backs the scheme. We plan to play our full part, and on Monday we will discuss this further when I chair the next meeting of the Ukraine Defence Contact Group alongside my German counterpart, Minister Boris Pistorius. That group, the contact group, continues as the forum for more than 50 nations to provide Ukraine with what it needs to fight back Putin's war machine. And I'm pleased that Monday's meeting will be attended by US Secretary Hegseth, the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and Secretary General Brinchevich. Britain is providing now more than 4.5 billion in military aid to Ukraine this year, more than ever before. And at the UDCG, I'll provide the following updates. First, on the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Scheme, 2/3 of the UK's ERA total of 2.26 billion has now been dispersed, including 700 million on artillery shells, long-range rockets, and air defence missiles, exactly what Ukraine needs most. Second, on drones. Since March, the UK has supplied nearly 50,000 drones to Ukraine, helping meet our commitment to increase tenfold our supply this year. Third, on air defence. The UK and Germany have agreed to partner in providing critical air defence missiles to Ukraine. And fourth, on the NATO Comprehensive Assistance Package, the UK will donate a further £40 million, which Ukraine can use on a range of programmes, from demining to rehabilitating their wounded. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is now 4 months since President Zelensky responded to President Trump's peace negotiations with Ukraine's full commitment to an unconditional ceasefire. President Putin has shown no such interest in an end to the fighting. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, peace in Ukraine is possible, and we must be ready for when that peace comes. So since March, the UK and France have led the coalition of the willing on planning new security arrangements to support Ukraine in any ceasefire. More than 200 military planners from 30 nations have worked intensively for weeks with Ukraine, and including reconnaissance in Ukraine led by UK personnel. Last week at the summit, President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer said that this initial phase of detailed military planning had concluded. And I can confirm that the military command and control structures have been agreed for a future multinational force, Ukraine. The force's mission will be to strengthen Ukraine's defences on the land, at sea, and in the air, because the Ukrainian armed forces are the best deterrents against future Russian aggression. It will include a 3-star multinational command headquarters in Paris, to London after 12 months. And when the force deploys, there will be a coordination HQ in Kyiv, headed by a UK 2-star military officer. It will regenerate land forces by providing logistics, armament and training experts. It will secure Ukraine's skies by using aircraft to deliver levels of support similar to that for NATO's air policing mission. And it will support safer seas by bolstering the Black Sea Task Force with additional specialist teams. When peace comes, we will be ready. When peace comes, we will play our part in securing it for the long term. And next month, on the 24th of August, Ukrainians will gather to celebrate their Independence Day. For another year, the anniversary of Ukraine's liberation will be marked under the pain of occupation. Whatever else commands the world's attention, we must never lose sight of this war. We must never lose sight of Putin's brutal, illegal invasion of this proud, sovereign nation. And we must never forget the price that Ukraine is paying, fighting for its own freedom and the security of all free nations, including our own. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK will stand with the Ukrainian people today, tomorrow, the day after, and for as long as it takes for Ukraine to prevail.
Shadow Secretary of State James Cartledge.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to Secretary of State for advance side of his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was less than a month ago that the United States undertook the bombing raid of Iranian nuclear facilities, one of the most significant military actions undertaken anywhere in the world for years. With such developments understandably dominating the headlines and almost 3.5 years elapsing since Russia first launched its unprovoked and illegal all-out invasion, it is right that the government regularly updates the House, as we did, on developments in Ukraine. For the reality is there has been no let-up in Russian aggression. As the Secretary of State confirmed, the 9th of July saw the largest drone attack of the war by Russia, and yesterday reports of Russia using 400 drones to target energy infrastructure and cities across Ukraine. This indiscriminate barbarism has inevitably led to further civilian casualties, but can the Secretary of State confirm that on the military side it is Russia that has suffered by far the greatest losses? He confirmed that last month Russian battlefield casualties surpassed 1 million. Doesn't this show the extent to which Putin has nothing but callous regard for the human impact of his actions on either side? Madam Deputy Speaker, we're proud of the decisive assistance we provided in office to Ukraine, and we continue to stand with the government in seeking to provide all possible support, but it is vital that all our allies also play their part. On France, and what was previously called the Coalition of the Willing, I agree we need to be ready for when peace comes. So can he confirm how many other nations will provide fighter jets to the multinational force Ukraine? Can he confirm that there is no longer any planning for a land combat element to the MNFU? On the United States, we welcome additional provision of military hardware by the US, but on paying for it, he says, and I quote, "We plan to play our part in full." So therefore, will the UK there be purchasing military equipment from the United States to pass on to Ukraine? The Secretary of State didn't mention potential sanctions or tariffs. It has been widely reported that President Trump is considering tariffs of 100% on goods coming into the US from any country that imports any product from Russia. Has the government discussed this plan with the US, and will the UK follow suit? Today's Times also reports that Andriy Yermak, senior advisor to President Zelensky, has stated that the imposition of secondary sanctions on nations buying oil and gas from Russia could end the war, and I quote, before the end of this year. Does the Secretary of State agree with that analysis? And again, would the UK join in any secondary sanctions policy directed against countries importing Russian oil and gas? On Germany, we understand the Prime Minister is meeting Chancellor Merz today. Can I urge the government to push their German counterparts on provision of Taurus missiles to Ukraine, or alternatively, given we understand they are compatible with Typhoon, backfilling UK stocks to enable provision of more Storm Shadow missiles? Turning to the impact of all this on the UK, we understand Germany will sign an agreement with the Prime Minister today that we will come to each other's aid in the event of attack on the other. Can he outline how this is different from NATO Article 5? Madam Deputy Speaker, in my own recent discussions with senior German parliamentarians on the impact on our own nations of supporting Ukraine, as has been widely reported, the Germans believe that drone overflights of their military bases were linked to nefarious Russian activity. So in the context of recent threats to RAF bases, and in particular drone overflights of Suffolk RAF bases and elsewhere last November, and I appreciate the sensitivity, can he update us at all on whether there is yet any indication of Russian involvement? In particular, can he update us on the progress of the review of security at UK bases that he announced last month? Now, as Defence Procurement Minister, I stripped out a whole load of processes and red tape to accelerate the in-service date of our groundbreaking Dragonfire anti-drone laser from 2032 to 2027. Given the extraordinary potential for directed energy weapons, can I ask Secretary of State if he will accelerate their adoption even further and ensure rapid testing in the specific context of anti-drone defence for our military bases? And on drones more broadly, in a written question in March, ministers confirmed to me they had ordered just 3 military drones for our own armed forces since the election. I've tabled subsequent written questions on progress, and ministers are now saying they can't answer the question. So what is the latest figure? when UK SMEs have provided some of the best drones and counter-drone measures used on the live battlefield in Ukraine, why are we not ordering the same kit in parallel for our own army, at scale and at pace, so that it can train today, not years away, on how war is actually fought right now in Ukraine? To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, after 3.5 years of war, we surely have to keep reminding the British public of the most important point for our national interest, namely that the best way to defend our homeland right now is to give all possible support to Ukraine so that the democracy triumphs over the dictatorship and stops Putin's aggression from spreading westwards.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Shadow Defence Secretary's welcome for this update. I welcome his continued commitment of support from the opposition, backing the steps we're taking to support Ukraine, just as we did in opposition to his government. He's right to point out that the massive Russian casualties show the contempt that President Putin has for the lives of his own people, as well as for those in Ukraine. And he's right also to point out that the level of Russian casualties far outnumber those of Ukraine. On the coalition of the willing, there are 30 nations involved in the planning. The military planning at this stage is now complete. We'll keep it refreshed in any period up to the point of renewed ceasefire negotiations, which we hope to see soon. There will be, as part of the plans as they stand at the moment, a land force. There will be a force and activity in the air and on the sea. I'm pleased to say that he backs the military aid that we're putting into Ukraine. He asks questions about the coalition of the willing, but I really don't recall, and I've checked, I don't recall him backing the coalition of the willing. And I'd like to ask him, does his party support Britain's leadership of this multinational force for Ukraine? As far as discussions on the Trump-NATO plan, these will be developed on Monday at the UDCG meeting that I will co-chair with Boris Pistorius. If sanctions and economic measures play a part in the actions that we as an international community need to play to bring Putin to the negotiating table, we will of course do that. His government had a good record. We've gone a lot further in the last year as well. We've introduced since July, Madam Deputy Speaker, over 500 new sanctions against individuals, entities, ships across all the regimes, and we've sanctioned now, as a nation, a total of 289 vessels in the Russian shadow fleet. Madam Deputy Speaker, he asks me about a couple of other things on base security. I will update the House when the full base security review is complete. On Dragonfire, he's right to say that he was instrumental in the first steps with this UK technology, but he left the programme largely unfunded. We are already accelerating it. We'll put it into 4 of our naval vessels, not just the one that he planned. And on drones, he knows that the question he keeps citing was a very specific answer to a very specific question. He knows that after the Strategic Defence Review, we are now doubling to over £4 billion the amount of money in this Parliament that we will invest in autonomy and drones. He knows that we'll establish a new drone centre of excellence. And so this will mean that we can accelerate the use of uncrewed systems or drones in every service. The Army, for instance, will train thousands of operators. This summer we'll start rolling out 3,000 strike drones. That'll be followed by over 1,000 surveillance drones, and we'll equip every section with drones for the future. This is what we mean in the Strategic Defence Review when we say we bring the power of new technology alongside the heavy metal of platforms like tanks and planes and ships to make Britain the most innovative armed forces in NATO.
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member for Aldershot, I know how deeply people in my constituency understand the cost of conflict and the value of standing by our allies. So I welcome this statement and thank the Secretary of State for his leadership on this issue. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the outcome in Ukraine matters not just for European security, but also for the UK's standing as a reliable defence partner? And for us to maintain this reputation, long-term investment in British capabilities and industries in constituencies like mine, where incidentally Dragonfire was created, is essential to sustaining our support and deterring further aggression.
My honourable friend is entirely right, and the UK has been the most reliable ally for Ukraine since before the full-scale invasion almost 3.5 years ago. And she's also right to say that a test of this nation is whether we are willing to step up the leadership on Ukraine, as we have, whether we're ready to step up the leadership in NATO, as we have, but underpinning all, whether we're ready to step up the level of defence investment in this country, which we have. And when the Prime Minister announced in February that this country would invest 2.5% of GDP by 2027 in defence, alongside the 5 billion extra in defence this year, Labour's first year in government, this is the largest increase in defence investment since the end of the Cold War.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I also thank the Defence Secretary for advance sight of his statement. We welcome the additional support to Ukraine because we must continue to support Ukraine to defend Europe. Russia's increased attacks are absolutely devastating, and we recognise the resilience of the Ukrainians and we support them. But President Trump only now seems to be realising what has always been clear, that Russia's brutal dictator has no interest in peace. So while I was surprised and relieved to see the President announce potential secondary sanctions if no ceasefire is agreed within 50 days, we all know that he is as changeable as the wind. No one has forgotten the humiliating ambush he laid for President Zelensky in the Oval Office, and there's no guarantee he won't soon revert to praising Putin again. A 50-day deadline could even encourage Putin to escalate his attacks in the meantime. That's why the UK must go further now to support Ukraine and increase pressure on the Kremlin. So could the Defence Secretary update the House on progress towards seizing the £25 billion in frozen Russian assets here in the UK and deploying them to Ukraine? And what discussions are underway with European partners, especially Belgium and Germany, on doing the same across the continent? More must be done to cut off all revenues fuelling Russia's war machine, and I recognise that Secretary of State has spoken about the shadow fleet, but will the government expand the UK's designation of vessels in the Russia shadow fleet, including those that are already sanctioned by the EU, Canada and the US? And finally, I want to turn to the announcement on the multinational force Ukraine. We welcome the conclusion of this first phase of planning and the UK's leading role in shaping the future security architecture for Ukraine, but we do need clarity on what this means in practical terms. So can the Defence Secretary confirm what the specific UK Armed Forces contribution will be to the multinational force Ukraine? And will there be any planned deployment of UK personnel on land, at sea or in the air once the mission is operational? And if so, what role will the UK play in this deployment?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, first we stand ready to expand sanctions on the Russian shadow fleet. Second, she asked about the coalition of the willing. The military planning is complete, with the prospect that we hope to see soon but can't see immediately of a ceasefire. Then the commitments and the details will be firmed up. They'll be reported appropriately to the House at that stage. And finally, she asks about the use of frozen assets. She will know the complexity of this challenge. She'll know the interest and will of the government to work on this, but she'll also recognise that the majority of those assets are held outside the UK, so any action on this front must be taken with others and must be taken alongside others, and therein lies the complexity of the discussions at present.
Dame Chiunwara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Secretary of State for the statement and his expression of his and indeed this House's unwavering commitment to the Ukrainian people against Putin's illegal war. I also would like to welcome the 40,000 drones that the UK, 50,000 drones that the UK has sent to the Ukraine, and to express my own admiration for the Ukrainian people and to say that they are fighting on behalf of all of us. Now, no one predicted the role of drones in this conflict and the absolutely astounding speed of the evolution of that technology in Ukraine, but also in Russia and in China. So can I ask the Secretary of State what steps he is taking with our allies to ensure that we maintain or develop technological advantage in key defence capabilities and get it to the front line?
My honourable friend is entirely right, and for the first time in human conflict history, drones are now killing far more and causing far more casualties than heavy artillery. She asks the challenging question that was at the heart of the Strategic Defence Review that we published at the beginning of last month. Learning lessons from Ukraine, how do we recognise the way that the change in warfare is accelerated by the rapidly advancing technology? And that is the reason that we're now making a £4 billion investment in this Parliament alone in the sort of drone technology that she cites and the potential of autonomy to reinforce the warfighting readiness of our forces and therefore the deterrence that we can play as a nation and as a nation within NATO.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, Operation Orbital, the Secretary of State will know, is the UK training programme for the Ukrainian military. Can the Secretary of State confirm to the House that that very personal and personnel data is safe at the MOD? And he mentioned about aerial attacks, 15,000 drone attacks over the last 4 months. He referenced meeting with Germans to look at counter-drone munitions, etc., and capabilities. But of course, Ukrainians are being attacked right now, today. So I wonder what thought has been given to the use of the RAF's Tucano aircraft, which I think are now out of service. I wonder where they are. Could they be redeployed? They're slow-flying aircraft that could interdict Shaheen drones, for example, and also perhaps the Grob propeller prop trainer as well, whether a variant could be provided. These are slow-flying aircraft. They could interdict these drones, and they are low cost and low maintenance.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not familiar with the Tucano aircraft. If they're still in our inventory, they've not come across my desk, but I'll certainly look into that and write to the Right Honourable Gentleman. On the matter of the orbital training programme, I'm confident that the data involved in those personnel are secure. I'm also proud of that programme. It was a programme, I have to say, that didn't just follow Putin's full-scale invasion in February, 3.5 years ago, but was in place after Russia first took Crimea and had proxy forces move into Donetsk and Luhansk. And there was a UK-Canadian training programme supporting Ukrainians from well before Putin's invasion. And since then, we've now trained over 56,000 Ukrainian forces through the UK-led multinational training programme.
Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the actions of Russia on the 9th of July, where they launched the largest air bombardment of Ukraine of the war to date, show that the Ukrainian civilians and military are still in a fight for their lives and the future of their country, and that this House, our government and our country must do everything possible to stand with them in that fight?
I do indeed, and my honourable friend is quite right to remind the House and the public. These Russian attacks aren't just directed at Ukrainian frontline and forces. These are directed at Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian civilians, and Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. And that is the harsh reminder of the sort of character that Putin is. A brutal, illegal invasion, entirely contemptuous of the lives of his own people, and attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure.
John Lamont.
Thank you very much. I fully support the work of the UK government in providing military assistance to Ukraine. Like so many voluntary groups across the United Kingdom, the Rotary Club of Duns has been actively involved in supporting Ukraine during the war. They've delivered several pickup trucks loaded with medical equipment and other essential supplies to Ukraine. So will the Secretary of State join me in paying tribute to the Rotary Club of Duns and the other voluntary groups who have been involved in this? But what more support can the government provide to voluntary groups in the UK who want to provide assistance to Ukraine?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would certainly pay tribute to his local Rotary Club and the other local groups that are reflecting that continuing public will to offer support where we can to Ukraine. Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, if there are specific aspects of support that those groups and his local Rotary Club is looking for in order to facilitate the sort of supplies they're getting to Ukraine, then I'd encourage him to contact me with those details.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd first of all like to thank the Defence Secretary for a very comprehensive statement. I, as a trade envoy, was with the UK government mission to the Ukraine Recovery Conference last week in Rome, and two of the top asks for their civilian recovery were improved air defence and demining. So I was very pleased to hear those in his statement. His statement was about our support for Ukraine, but for the long-term security of our own country and the whole of Europe. Can I ask the Secretary of State what lessons we are learning in the Ministry of Defence and UK defence industry from Ukraine, because they are the ones innovating in defence in the world?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is probably one of the most energetic and ceaseless supporters of Ukraine. Not just in this House, but I know that he has gone out with supplies to Ukraine in order to support civilians and comrades out there. Can I say to him, I'm very glad he was at the Ukrainian Recovery Conference in Italy last week. And can I say to him also that if he is looking for the lessons that the UK Ministry of Defence is pulling from Ukraine, I will send him a personal copy of the Strategic Defence Review.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. These plans for the so-called coalition of the willing are contingency plans. They're designed for a time when Putin agrees to a ceasefire in Ukraine, which, as the Secretary of State acknowledged, he shows no sign of doing. With the prospect of Ukraine's allies, such as the UK, deploying armed forces to Ukraine after a ceasefire, how does this prospect incentivise the Kremlin to sue for peace?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think one of the signals to President Putin that the coalition of the willing underlines is that there are a large number of deeply committed democratic countries willing to stand with Ukraine in their fight against Putin's invasion, but willing also to stand alongside them in any peace in order to secure a long, lasting and just settlement. And the single message that Putin should take is that Ukraine will keep fighting, we will keep supporting them, and that the best way for Putin now is to accept he needs to come to the negotiating table, he needs to talk and put an end to this fighting.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his important update. It's clear that Russia's growing aggression undermines our security here at home, as he said. Does the Defence Secretary agree with me that the outcome of the war in Ukraine matters deeply to every one of my constituents in Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, as much as it does across the whole country and indeed all of Europe? And can he update us any further on the measures he's taking to counter Russian aggression?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, her constituents in Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy represent the sentiment of Britain across the UK. Strong support for Ukraine, 3.5 years into this war, a recognition that this is a matter that rises above party politics, and a recognition in general that UK does not just need to say we stand with Ukraine, but needs to demonstrate that in the actions that we're taking. And I hope that her constituents will support the government in what we're doing.
Before I call the next member, could I just urge everybody in here whose phone might be going off, that's the 5th time I've heard it, silence is golden. John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can confirm it's not my phone. My ringtone is 633 Squadron, very distinctive. It's tremendous that the planning for the coalition of the willing has been put together so quickly, but plans are paper tigers. We need flying tigers. If we are to secure any peace that is eventually secure, we will need air superiority over Ukraine. So can the Secretary of State for Defence give us a clue, perhaps not naming individual countries, but how many of the 30 in the coalition of the willing are prepared to put combat aircraft into this plan?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it wasn't my phone either, I'm happy to say. I have to say to the Honourable Gentleman, he does an injustice to the more than 200 military planners that have worked over the last 4 months from more than 30 nations on the detail of the military planning that hasn't just been an exercise with Ukraine based and led in France and the UK, but has involved detailed reconnaissance in Ukraine led by UK personnel. So these are serious military plans. They are designed for the circumstances of a ceasefire, circumstances that are not entirely clear now, but we hope to see. They will be refined regularly between now and any point of peace. They are designed to make sure that when we get that peace, we're ready to support that peace, and we're ready to support that peace as a multinational force for Ukraine.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for his update and also the leadership he is displaying on this issue. In Russia and the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, Russian authorities have introduced military patriotic training in schools and in youth groups and exposed Ukrainian children to military propaganda urging enlistment in the Russian armed forces. There are also reports that Russia is recruiting Ukrainian teenagers and young adults to carry out espionage and sabotage within Ukraine. So does my honourable friend agree with me that Ukraine's children have no place on the battlefield in this war? And can he say a little more about the work he's doing with colleagues in the FCDO on holding those responsible for the militarisation of Ukraine's children and their forced deportation to account?
Hear, hear, hear.
Can I pay a huge tribute to my honourable friend for the ceaseless work she's doing to try and draw public attention in the UK to the plight of abducted children and teenagers from Ukraine in Russia. They certainly have no place on the Russian front line. They have no place on the battlefield, and abducted Ukrainian children have no place in Russia. When the Foreign Secretary and I were still in opposition and we first went to Ukraine together, we met with a magnificent charity that was bringing abducted Ukrainian children back from Russia. We sat down with 4 of the young teenagers who had been subject to exactly the sort of treatment my honourable friend identifies. And I'll just say to her, I will look to work with her to reinforce any of the steps that we can take in this country with colleagues in the Foreign Office in order to draw greater attention to this brutal abuse of young people.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been 3.5 years since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and we all know that there has been a huge amount of loss of life, incredible disruption and pain to many, many residents, not only in Ukraine, but across the world. And I saw this for myself when I was meeting with the Healey Ukrainian Association, who have gone above and beyond in not only raising funds for those in Ukraine, but supporting those many families in my constituency. And Madam Deputy Speaker, the owners of Healey Cougars are in Ukraine as we speak, delivering sports equipment for those sport organisations in the rugby league in Ukraine who are unable to have the equipment that they need as a result of the war. So will the Secretary of State join me in paying tribute to those 2 organisations? And will he also just comment on the fact that we all know that a divided West only benefits Russia. So following the latest talks with NATO, what more could the government be doing to ensure other nations are playing their part, both through military support and in terms of funding and developing key defence capability to continue to support Ukraine?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd say to the honourable gentleman, the UK is playing a leading part by co-chairing the Ukrainian Defence Contact Group, as I will be on Monday. That is the forum in which up to 50 nations coordinate the support, respond to the needs that Ukraine has for battlefield support. We're also leading by, alongside the French, developing the coalition of the willing, planning for the future. In relation to his constituency, I pay huge tribute to the Keighley Cougars. If they're out in Ukraine delivering sports equipment, hats off to them and thank you. I'd just say I see that as typical of the generosity of the people in Yorkshire.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Brave Ukrainians in my constituency of Rugby, who are a long way from their compatriots at home, tell me of the continuing suffering of civilians, I repeat, civilians, due to Russian aggression. So will the Defence Secretary join me in welcoming the new drive from President Trump and NATO to make sure that Ukraine is in the best possible position both to defend itself and in any future negotiations?
My honourable friend, in reminding the House about the Ukrainian families that are in Rugby, reminds us that this is a war, an invasion that has forced many to flee their home. Many have still receiving shelter from UK families, and I pay tribute to those who are offering that shelter. He's absolutely right. We've been willing to back President Trump in his bid to secure a negotiated peace in Ukraine from the outset. We look to this next stage as a hopeful sign. We will do whatever we can to reinforce his efforts to put pressure now on President Putin and bring him to the negotiating table.
Phil Brickell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and as Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Germany, may I take this opportunity to welcome Monday's joint chairing of the Ukrainian Defence Contact Group by the Defence Secretary alongside his German counterpart Boris Pistorius, and can I congratulate the government on today's landmark bilateral treaty between the UK and Germany, signed here in London between the Prime Minister and Chancellor Merz on mutual defence, on security cooperation and industrial collaboration, which demonstrates our determination to stand up to Putin's continued acts of aggression, wherever they may take place, as well as the government's enduring commitment to Ukraine.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome our honourable friend's role in chairing the all-party group on UK-Germany. This is a new coalition government in Germany. It's making a massively welcome contribution to increased support to NATO and to European security. I welcome that greater contribution. I note that the defence is still led by an SPD minister in Boris Pistorius, and very ably so. And I especially welcome that at the heart of this new friendship treaty that Chancellor Merz and our Prime Minister will sign today is the Trinity House Agreement that Boris Pistorius and I struck back in October, a deep defence agreement for the first time between the UK and Germany. It means that we will do so much more together. We will do so much more together as two nations, but also as two nations within NATO.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement this afternoon?